happen if you don't have points that cross here, or maybe you only have one point that crosses here. So let's talk about those two examples. And we'll label this note number of solutions, okay? And this will be our last note. It'll be pretty quick, actually. So, number of solutions. First off, you have three options. You could have 2 solutions, and then I'll show what that looks like. You could have 1 solution, and then I'll show what that looks like. And then you could have, oops, I didn't mean to put the colon there. And then you could have no solution. And I'll show what that looks like. Okay, so let's look at all 3 examples. So first off, having 2 solutions is pretty straightforward. We probably don't need to talk too much about this because we just had an answer with 2, or just had a quadratic with 2 solutions. But it's basically just when you have a parabola that just crosses it normally at 2 locations. Pretty easy to tell that, right? So that's pretty standard. That could happen upside down, upside right, doesn't really matter. But let's talk about what happens when you have 1 solution. So you could get 1 solution if this happens. So let's say you solved this and you actually found that your vertex was touching the point, right? Let's draw this going down, just as an example. I always try and draw these as nice as possible, but it's kind of hard. So this is an example of 1 solution. So something to note here is that you know already you're going to have 1 solution if your vertex is going to land on the x-axis. Okay, so if you come across a solution where you're doing you do step 1, you get it set equal to 0, and then you're doing step 2, and you realize as you're doing step 2 that when you plug in for x, you get a number, right? So let's say in this case you got -1, and then you go to plug in -1 for x, and you solve, and you get 0. So if you get 0 as your answer here, this is kind of the highlight of what we're talking about right now, is if you get 0 for your answer here, you know it's going to land on the x-axis, right? X-axis. Since you know that, you don't have to continue. You kind of do in order to graph it, if the problem asks you to graph it. But if you're just looking for an answer, then you can stop the answer right then, and you can go to the conclusion that x is equal to -1. Okay, so you basically get to skip the other steps of doing a lot more work, and you can kind of just assume, oh, that's going to be the answer. However, I'm still going to want you to graph it, right? So you got to kind of graph it afterwards anyway. So let's look at a no solution. I didn't leave a whole lot of room, but that's okay. This one's pretty easy to see what's going on. So a no solution basically happens if it doesn't cross the x-axis at all. And that's going to happen when it looks like this. If you basically have a parabola that is floating either above or below the x-axis. So notice here, even though it crosses the y-axis, we don't really care about that. It's the fact that it does not cross the x-axis. And so if that happens, then you can just put your answer as no solution. okay? So when that happens, just put your answer as no solution. And just for fun, we'll put the answers that we would have gotten in this example, right? We would have gotten x equals -1 or x equals 1. So here you can see 2 solutions, 1 solution, no solution, and the 3 different types, okay? And that's basically everything you need to know for graphing and solving by graphing, okay? If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks.